Motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right, Jamie has made the motion, and Arlen has seconded. Is there any comments? Anyone wishing to be heard on this item? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the meeting summary, say aye.
Aye.
I didn't do anything.
Passes. Next on our agenda will be any audience or public comments that have been submitted. I have not received any at this time. So we'll move on to our next item. Be on the sub-area priority projects. Very happy that we've been able to schedule 4 of our TMC representatives to come talk to us. I think each of them has a short presentation and will be available for questions from the committee. And I don't know if you guys have determined who's going to go first. Seeing none, Rod, would you like to go? Rod Lane from ADOT.
That's all right.
If we can get you on mic, that'd be good.
Yes, I'll just sit at my chair after I give her my thumb drive. So you should
Super.
be able to hear me.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Chair, we actually have a slide presentation that has an order of who's going to present. So if you don't mind, let's start with that slide presentation and then we'll follow that order.
I'm sorry, Farhad, could you repeat that?
Yes, we have a slide presentation that Crystal can put up. And then the order of presenters would follow the slide as well.
Okay.
Thank you. So go ahead and Crystal, advance, please. Okay, so these are the sub areas we discussed at the last meeting. Advance, please. All right, yeah, I think ADOT is first. So next one, please. There you go. Thank you.
Super. Rod, do you also have some slides that you want to show?
Well, I'll speak to the list, what's in front of me there, and then I've also got some PDFs.
Okay.
That are actually public information already that I'm just going to share and offer up for those that didn't necessarily know that there was public information out there. We're revolving around this. So ADOT's submittal, ADOT's projects that were submitted for the RTA Next program consist entirely of the projects that are laid out in our design concept report, DCR, for the I-10 SR210 study. That study was finished in 2020 when we got the it was signed and completed. And we're now moving forward with that. And that consists of the reconstruction of I-10 all the way from the I-10 I-19 intersection all the way out to Kolb. It consists of widening and all of those traffic interchanges, TIs, are going to be updated and replaced. The original list was for 18 projects. Considering that the RTA Next, if approved, would start in 2027. The first 2 projects on that list are already going to be in process and probably moving through construction by that date. So those would be Keno and Country Club. So that's why they're not included in the original list. The next 2 projects, which are 6th and Park, we originally thought that they would also be earlier. They're also a lower cost on those projects. They're a much lower dollar value. But we're now seeing that those are probably going to be within the realm of the time frame of the RTA next. So I think it would be a good opportunity for the community to put any kind of enhancements that they would want to put in those projects through the RTA next and make them available for the RTA next program. So I know that the list that came out had those two not in it, but we'd like to see those to also be considered.
Rod, could you explain to the committee what you mean by an enhancement by the local jurisdiction?
Sure. So the design concept report lays out what ADOT intends to do in terms of their project. Those particular projects are in heavy urban areas. So there might be more things that the community might want that would be beyond the original scope spelled out in the design concept report. Could be anything from additional lighting, could be pedestrian bridges, it could be wider sidewalks, it could be wider bridge decks for bicycle facilities, things like that. Those are beyond the original scope of what ADOT would do. But we would certainly be willing to construct them should the funding become available for them and such. So those would be considered community enhancements, but often is the case with these types of projects, the communities will take advantage of the economies of scale and incorporate that work into our work. So we would construct it and they would often maintain it.
Just give us a couple of quick examples of RTA one taking advantage of and kind of coordinating with ADOT projects. I would imagine the TI is like maybe Ina Road or.
Yes, I believe,
another.
I can't tell you exactly what, without having the scopes in front of me. There was RTA money included in the Ina project. There was RTA money included in the Ruthroff project. There was RTA money included in the Ajo project. There's a RTA money included in the SR 77 project. There's RTA money included in the upcoming Irvington Road traffic interchange project. Those are some examples of the funding that was the region participated in with ADOT when we constructed those projects.
Perfect, thanks. Yes.
So all these ADOT projects, ADOT's planning to fund these, and then what you're asking the RTA is just add some community enhancements, or is there a plan to fund these already?
So there's several reasons you're
Basically, for my
your
tent,
question has
it's from downtown to Toll
simple
Road.
question, but it's got lots of levels.
I know, and I still struggle with this after
And is-
3 years.
Rod, is this something you'd rather get through these
Okay.
slides first and then take on, or is it okay with you? That
Let's do that, but
derailing your
it's a,
process?
I don't want to miss it because it's an excellent question and it needs an explanation and exploration kind of thing. So we'll go through the list here, if you don't mind, and we'll talk about the project. So basically, we're marching down I-10 to do these projects. So on my PDF, on my thumb drive, there is a folder called SR2 I-10 SR210. If you can open up that folder, it has within it 3 or 4 different PDFs in there. There's one in there that's called the implementation plan. Can you open that for me, please? There it is. So this is a page out of the design concept report, which is a public document and it's available on our website. So you can actually download this. And this is the list of the projects. And if you'll just scroll down to the next page, you'll see the map of how the projects are scheduled to go out. All of those numbers on the map correlate with the list on the previous page of when these projects are scheduled to be implemented. A rough idea of a time frame. It's the order of sequence of the implementation of these projects. So another really interesting aspect of this website that we have set up for these projects is we have maps and roll maps of the entire length of the job. So if you'll go back, well, let's open the design concept report cover. There should be another file in there called I-10 SR210 design concept report, or DCR. Find it? There we go. So this is the cover page for that design concept report. And this is all available electronically online to the public. You can download the entire document and peruse it at your convenience. But it lays out the logic of why we're doing this. This section of I-10 is the oldest section of I-10 we have. It's got a lot of safety issues, a lot of problems with it in terms of capacities. There's lots of TIs, traffic interchanges, that have significant safety issues. And that's why we think this is the most important section within the PAG region to improve in terms of ADOT facilities. So if we'll open up the other map, which is called a roll plot, and we can take the roll plot that goes from I-19 to SR-210. I think it's called the West roll plot. And again, this is all available online. And if you were to zoom in on these, you can actually see what we're planning on constructing and downloading for each individual project. If this particular one doesn't show where the limits are between one project to another project, but it does show you what ADOT is planning to construct. And this is set up into 3 of these roll plots. There's this roll plot, which is the west half, which goes from I-10 to SR-210. Then there's the east half, which goes from SR-210 to Kolb. And then there's the I-10 SR-210 section, which is going to connect I-10 all the way to the SR-210 section. So you'll really get a good idea of the footprint that we're going to be impacting out here. So that's my presentation at this point. Now, I'm sorry, the question, let's repeat that question again. I want to be clear that I'm gonna answer it. Wait, you got some more food in your mouth.
Yes.
What's the level of coordination between RTA and ADOT? If we fund these partially, does that accelerate the timeline? Or are we limited when we doing like value add things?
Well, you're limited to anything that the boards would want to pursue. The way it was done last time, the way historically, there's several reasons why I do this. First of all, let's make sure that you understand how ADOT funding kind of works in the PAG region. So we get highway user revenue funds that come in, and they're split into 3 areas around the state. Split through MAG, they're split through PAG, and they're split through the rest of the state. That's why when you look at the ADOT State Transportation Board's annual program, you'll see those 3 things are approved. The PAG one and the MAG one are really just kind of an approval by the board, by the state board. They're approved regionally and developed regionally. So that means the PAG develops or approves the regional program for ADOT. What ADOT does is present our needs to PAG and say, this is what we feel is important to keep the system working and evolving in the way that we want it to evolve. And this is the direction we want to go. And then we have our discussions and then so on. That pot of money is only so big. So it's split by the Casa Grande Accords by a percentage. MAG and PAG split, I think it's 50%. The rest of the state gets the other 50%. And I think we get 13% in PAG. That would mean MAG gets 37% of it. So we get that 13%. We have to spend it in only on the ADOT system within the PAG region. So that's the funding source that you're talking about. So that gives us a certain amount of money. ADOT uses it to its most efficient way possible. We build what we maintain. If I'll give you some good example, you can see downtown Tucson, and this wasn't necessarily PAG money because I believe it was before then. But if you look at those bridges that cross underneath Speedway and Grant and all the crossings underneath downtown I-10, they're really long. The bridges themselves are long. The sidewalks got another 30 feet behind, another 30 feet space behind there. That was not ADOT's original intention. The region and the community came to ADOT and said, hey, we want to make available this space. We want the space to be available for some use at some point. ADOT doesn't build parks. We're a transportation agency, but we can do that. So additional funding became available, whether it was from the region or whatever entity, to do those type of improvements that ADOT would not necessarily normally done. We wouldn't have, expanded a bridge if we didn't need to. Same thing for like 18th Street, where we used to have just a box culvert crossing, and now there's a significant pedestrian undercrossing under there that can be utilized for many different things. So that's kind of what I always thought was a good example of it. Did I answer your question?
Mr. Chair, just so I understand, so these projects are going to be done regardless of what PAG is doing or RTA? All these ADOT projects.
Well, they're going to be approved at some point.
But where we come in is if we want enhancements like widen sidewalks.
Well,
or-
let's
or a
talk
green
more.
belt
The
or
pot of
something.
money is also only so big. So right now, you're looking at, we've just gotten the IIJA infrastructure funding. That's a 5-year program. So, that means the last year of that is 27, which is the first year of the RTA Next program. So that means our funding, unless there's some other source coming up behind that, is going to drop considerably. So if the region wants to continue these, it may be in their best interest to participate and input more money so that they can move them up or
Gotcha.
move them around, things like that, because we only have so much funding available. So the
So-
reasons,
So that's where PAG and RTA, we can accelerate the process
exactly. you
if
can
we belly
accelerate-
up to the bar, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. I think that answers it.
Okay.
Past. Will that enhance the funds that ADOT has for this kind of a project, or do they, or all the money goes somewhere else?
Again, we're still required to use, it depends on which funding you're talking about, because there's a ton of different funding options available in the infrastructure bills. There's a lot of individual grants and things like that that the city is pursuing, the state is pursuing, tons of other communities are pursuing. Relative to the HERF funding, we'll still have the same requirements. The HERF funding got increased because of the IIJA, but we're still required to disseminate the HERF funding per the Casa Grande Accord. So we're still required to spend that 13% of that money in the PAG region on state highways. But it ends after 27, it's gone. So that's why we accelerated Keno and Country Club. But by the time those projects are done, we will be through the IIJA funding. So those are very expensive projects.
I have Arlen first, and then Moss, and then Bruce.
Thanks. So I understand IIAJ means the infrastructure bill or federal legislation.
Yes.
I don't know acronyms. So.
Good. I can't tell you what it is.
Okay, I just checked.
Infrastructure, it's got jobs in there. J is jobs.
Okay.
Exactly.
So basically I've got a 3-part question, and it's sort of following up on this one too. So there's a budget in this plan, or a dollar number in this, for each of these projects, proposed projects. Is that budget I don't know what that budget is. Is that the budget for you, or what ADOT's going to spend on the project in total? Is that the budget for these enhancements? Or have these enhancements that you're talking about something that we even considered and are not in the budget? That's a different set of money.
Okay, this is another very good question. So this project is under what we call a major project, what the feds call a major project, because of its price tag. The price tag from the design concept report is off the top of my head, 1.2 billion for all of the projects. A major project is any project over $500 million. So this is then classified as a major project according to the Fed. Because of that classification, we have to do what's termed a financial plan. So we have done other major projects in the past. The South Mountain is a good example of it. Those were always standalone projects. This is a corridor. So the first step in the design process for Keno and Country Club is going to be to develop this financial plan, which will do what you're talking about. It will tell us if how the dollar value works, and then the anticipated dollar value all the way along for the entire corridor. But we'll get a really good snap, a really good shot of Keno and Country Club, and then we'll know if the funding is good. The funding that we're going to be looking at is strictly the funding of the work that's in the design concept report. Doesn't include any kind of enhancements or something that somebody might desire or want. It's what's in the design concept report. Okay.
So the dollar amount that's in, Mr. Chair, the dollar amount that's in the number for each is actually then state money and some part of RTA money, but not for these enhancements.
Well, it hasn't been programmed yet, so I think I'd be hesitant. It's the cost of the project.
The total cost of the project.
Whether it's
Okay.
state money, whether it's federal money. First of all, just because the money goes through the state, it doesn't mean it's state money, it's federal funds.
Yeah.
So we always call that the color of the money. And distinguish the color of the money at this phase might be a bit premature.
Okay, so the numbers we're looking at is the total cost of each of those projects.
Mhm.
RTA would have some share of that amount, not the total amount. And none of that includes the additional enhancements that you were just talking about.
Or the scheduling
Or the
requirements.
schedule.
Or the
Okay.
scheduling requirements.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question is, from a timing standpoint, RTA next is 20 years,
Mhm.
right? So is it, how do we know that all of these projects can get done within that 20-year time frame? Or is the answer, we don't really know that, only a portion of them, but we don't know what portion?
The answer is we don't really know that.
Okay.
I think we're going to get a clearer picture when we do get this financial plan together, because we will apply the potential revenue sources to it so we can kind of see how it's going to come out. But we don't know. I think it's if we can do all 18 projects, that would be surprising.
Yeah, okay. So the bottom line is that financial plan comes after the RTA scheduled work that we're doing here, right?
Well, I'm not sure you can
Exactly.
ask.
Yeah, our
the board.
financial plan, which is a project requirement for this particular project. We expect to start that in a few months. And I don't expect it to take that long. I expect it to be done by the first part of next year. That's my expectation. It'll be done prior to the final development of the project list, I guess.
And probably more important is the timing of coordination with the individual jurisdictions. So I'm taking you to say that hasn't occurred yet, since you don't have any of their money built into these cost estimates or any of those ancillary projects that may or may not be added by jurisdictions.
Correct.
And by the same token, I would assume it means that you haven't necessarily sat down with the intersecting jurisdictions, or if you haven't, maybe they have, to look at those projects that they've run forward to see if any of them are impacted by this I-10 project. Do we know offhand how many of the projects, or does anybody in the sound of my voice know the impact of projects that have been submitted by the jurisdictions on this I-10 DCR.
Well, I know that all of our projects are within the city of Tucson. South Six might be in South Tucson. I just don't know the limits off the top of my head. But they're all within, the remainder are all within the city of Tucson.
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify something.
Sure, thanks, Farhad.
Sure. The spreadsheet that you have shows the total cost for each project. There's also another column that shows the amount of RTA requested to leverage those funds. So it goes back to Arnold's question there. So the amount of RTA requests is in a separate column on your spreadsheet.
Thank you. And my final question is, so back to the enhancements again, that you talked about, which don't show up on either of those columns because they're something that hasn't been considered. Is it possible for any of those enhancements to come through RTA next, or are they all through local jurisdictions desired? Separately from RTA, or both?
Is this a question for me?
I'm asking the question. It's a question, as Tom said, for anybody within the sound of my voice. I don't know the answer to that.
You know, if I may, Mr. Chair, offer that that certainly enhancements are something that could be considered by the for inclusion in RTA.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Moss.
Thank you. So I also have a kind of series of questions, but just to kind of cap Arlen's really helpful and thoughtful questions. So what I'm hearing is that these projects are going to happen regardless of RTA funding. Is that accurate?
That would be up to the PAG board. PAG board programs will program these.
Well, the ADOT board has moved forward on all these projects, although they may not be funded in a 10-year program or 5-year program. But these are projects that ADOT advances because they want to build them.
Mr.
Correct.
Chair, if I
So
may add to
ADOT
that.
goes to the board, goes to the PAG board with their desires for construction. Like we said, we have a pot of money that we have to spend on ADOT projects. So we go to the PAG board, we make our recommendations for what we want to spend the money on. So these are going to be the projects that we recommend moving forward in that process as well.
Mr. Chair, if I may add as well.
Sure.
As Rod mentioned early on, before the federal transportation bill that passed recently, ADOT had no money to advance any of these projects. So as he mentioned, this is a 5-year funding plan, and only a portion of them would be funded through the current federal plan. Beyond that, we do not know where the funds would come from.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess the question that keeps racking around in my brain, especially, knowing that PAG, while PAG administers RTA, the RTA and its funds are separate from PAG, right? Like, I think that everybody agree with that's accurate? Or that I have that straight?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
That I was just trying to just confirm that, my knowledge with the structure of PAG and RTA is such that PAG is an administrator of RTA, but RTA is a separate entity and has separate funds, right, through the sales tax.
Correct. RTA is a standalone entity with its own revenue. And as we discussed earlier, even back in 2006, when the RTA plan was developed, that plan relied on local funds, impact fees, as well as federal and state funds. So the RTA plan can include any and all other funds as well.
Sure. So then, the process we've been hearing about is really though geared towards PAG and its responsibility as a federally enabled MPO, right?
So again, it goes back to the difference between PAG planning process and coordination on the federal dollars
Right.
So RTA can be considered as a revenue source and an entity similar to the state, similar to the federal government. So PAG addresses all those in collaboration with all the entities to complete projects.
Sure. So, but I guess I'm just trying to establish that these are separate things, and that ADOT's process to go through PAG is also very separate from RTA. I know that it's a lever that can be pulled for funding, right? Okay. And so I guess when we're going back to looking at all the conversations we've been having within this committee is, what are regional projects? And so I guess the question that I have come in, I've been thinking about this entire time is like, why is it the Pima County region's responsibility to fund with our regional sales tax dollars, state and federal projects?
Well, let Rod answer that as well. But again, I would point back to the previous RTA plan, and had we not partnered with the state and federal entities for funding, we would not have a lot of the safety improvement projects as well as mobility improvements similar to Ina Road traffic interchange, the Twin Peaks traffic interchange, the frontage road down in Green Valley. So it's a collaboration and identifying priorities regardless of the flavor of the money.
Yeah, I guess I totally hear that, and I understand there were a lot of RTA primarily funded projects that leverage these other dollars, as has been mentioned. I guess I'm just trying to understand when and I think this was a guiding principle and objective from the previous plan of really having regionally specific projects that are funded through this sales tax that we're collecting. And so I'm just trying to understand how state and federal projects, why that's being considered a regional project.
So
Again, system-wide, and I'll rely on Rod and his team to answer the question. System-wide, obviously, those are significant corridors, and they tie into our local access. So that's really, I think, where ADOT is a good partner in helping us improve mobility, not only through the interstate system, but connecting to all of our arterials and other access points. We talked about access to employment centers. We talked about just mobility across town. So that's the preference of the community. If the community believes that we can invest in leveraging local dollars to bring more federal dollars, then that's the conversation we hope to have.
I think though, like the thing I'm trying to get at that is, right, our region has limited funding sources from which we can use to fund our transportation projects, and the RTA is a really essential and critical one. And that, right, like on the flip side, ADOT has state mechanisms for, how they can raise funds, and if they're don't have enough funds to cover their projects that they're mandated to maintain and build and such, that to me that just sounds like a state level issue that is responsible to our state legislature and what types of taxes they're imposing for transportation. Right now, what I'm getting at is that it feels as though our region is getting shouldered with the cost of state projects because we're underfunding our infrastructure investment in the state. And so I'm just trying to understand what's the value for us to do that. We have plenty of cross-regional projects that we could be investing in, and a lot of support that our individual communities need to connect better to employment hubs around here. And I'm not really hearing a compelling case at this time for why our sales tax should go towards state projects that are going to happen and are most likely going to happen, and it's due to state funding shortages.
And Rod, you may want to answer this question as well. So we don't think they will happen. Again, we were fortunate with the recent federal funding that we're seeing some additional funding, some movement. But you can look at the Maricopa County Prop 400 that passed. A significant amount of those funds were allocated towards the state system as well. But I'll let Rod tell you that without these recent federal funds, most likely all they had left was maintenance money and nothing else. Is that correct, Rod?
Yes, so I'd like to expand a little bit on this. So I think the first point that I need to make is that ADOT is a very active participant in the regional transportation system. We've been involved regionally and locally and cooperated with every agency and every organization within this region. Our organization touches virtually everyone, I think, except the Far East section in some way or another across this region. So our system is a vital aspect of the regional transportation system. We have a board member, our state transportation board member sits on the board of both PAG and the RTA. So those are both good examples of the level of participation of ADOT within the regional transportation system. And then beyond that, it's how does that statewide system fit regionally? How do we tie in regionally? What is the local flavor, local desire of how ADOT's transportation system interacts with the regional transportation system? Those are all aspects.
Let's remind people also that the state transportation system that you talk about is not I-10, I-19.
Correct.
So you might explain a little bit about
Correct.
things like
That's a-
state
that's a very
routes
good point.
and other, federally or state.
That's a very good point. So not only do we have the interstates, but Ajo, which is SR 86, is also a state highway. SR 77, which is Miracle Mile and then turns into Oracle Road and goes all the way up to Globe, is also a state highway. So all of those accesses, those side streets, those business driveways, all of that are all functions that are maintained and operated by the state highway system. And that's a considerable regional component in how we interact with the system regionally. So I'm going to respectfully disagree. I do believe that ADOT has a considerable regional component, and I think it is money well spent to coordinate with ADOT to get the desired transportation system that will best suit the region.
I guess,
Hey,
well,
Moss, I
Tom,
want
well,
to cut it
Tom, I
off.
have a couple other questions still on that though, and because I also want to point out that I think that the idea that the federal dollars are going to just run out is a bit misleading, and especially the IIJ was an infusion of federal dollars. It wasn't filling something that there were federal dollars still coming. And again, to my point, these are all, everything that you listed. Yes, they are regional. There are projects that are important to our region, the Oracle, right, Ajo, but that's also state infrastructure, right? And so we're thinking about what is our regional infrastructure, what is our local infrastructure.
Okay,
and so,
sorry to cut you off, Amanda, but right
hey
now.
Tom, come on, man.
We're going to debate that for sure, but.
Well, Tom, I
Right
have a number of other questions, and frankly, this is pretty
It'll allow us
disrespectful.
to do that.
Tom, please, let me finish. And I think this is really disrespectful.
We can't have the debate right now. We don't have time for it today, or at least not at this moment. Hold on to it.
Can I please finish my thought though?
We'll
Because I
have
also,
a full
Tom,
debate when
if I
everyone
could
else-
please finish my thought, we could have been done by now.
Yeah, we are done. Okay.
Come on, Tom. This is ridiculous.
No, it's fine. I'm just trying to get our meeting going forward.
This is really important. This is one of the few times that we're going to have
I agree
access
it
to a ADOT representative to ask our questions, have them answered. And I thought that that's exactly what this time was used for. And I think
You've
that
asked and answered those questions.
no, I haven't actually, because I was trying to understand certain things, and
No,
now I'm
you-
getting cut
no,
off.
you were
And
just
it's,
you were making your statement and your arguments, which I fully.
I have,
respect
Tom, I
and
actually
agree
have
with.
other questions too that are related to federal fundings and the IIJ and other federal initiatives that relate to the enhancements, which are what is being pitched to us as the reason to fund things.
All right, hold
Because
on to those questions. You will get to ask them in a minute, but I'd like for some other people who have questions to also get theirs out. I'll be back to you in a minute. Bruce?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I make a comment and an observation and a couple of questions to follow up on Arlen's. Guess my comment, with all due respect to Moss, is that I see Interstate 10 as part of the backbone of the regional transportation system. So I think it is relevant to discussion about a regional plan. Without the ability to move that traffic through the region and in this region, we would have serious problems. And the interstate system is not just about movement of interstate traffic and trade. It also provides transportation linkage for a lot of people in town who are moving across town to work, to schools, to all those kinds of things. So I think I understand the distinction between funding sources, but I do think we need to view it within the regional context. An observation I would make is that these 18 projects go up to Kolb Road. This understates the problem that we also need additional improvements from Kolb Road all the way out to Colossal Cave Road, which is one of the most fast growing parts of our region. Just a couple of questions. This is more from my understanding. I think Arlen got to a lot of these, but is my understanding you're suggesting that the 18 projects that are listed right now have an estimated cost of $1.5 billion? Is that correct?
I believe it was 1.2 billion,
1.2.
but that was at the time that the DCR was completed. So there is no inflation factor in that. So we're going to get a better value as the financial report comes out. And then that financial report, each time a new project is moved forward towards construction, that report will be updated. So it's a living document.
And this may be oversimplistic, but the funding for those projects from state and federal funds, we would get roughly 13.7% of the state funds allocated for these kinds of projects to PEG. Is that correct for these projects? And then PEG's job would be to decide which of those projects be funded from that 13.7%.
Correct. And that's federal funds. That's not state funds.
Okay,
It's the
federal
state's
funds.
share of federal funds.
All right. And then we're saying there are no additional federal state funds to supplement that at this point?
At this point, we're
Identified.
identified. That's part of the TIP process.
Okay.
And how we go through with the funding and such, that would be part of the TIP process.
So going back to Moss' point, it is possible that a request could subsequently be made to the state legislature for additive funding or supplemental funding on top of that. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, if I may just put some context.
Sure.
So the region receives roughly about $24 million of state funds and roughly about the same of federal dollars. So if you put that in context, that's let's say best case scenario, that's $50 million of regional funds. And for a project of this magnitude, that'll take probably over 20 years to fund it in small phases. So what we're talking about is a significant project that needs a significant investment, and short of any additional funding sources that comes to the region, again, I'll rely on ADOT to answer this question. We don't see any other solution other than that significant federal dollars and any other supplements that can support it.
Okay, so I think I understand where we are with the funding part of it. If the funds were available for these projects, what would be a reasonable time period for their completion? Are we looking at 20 years or do we know?
We don't know. I can tell you we've only planned at this point the first two, and they're going to be prior to RTA next. So they'll be done. That's why they're not in the program. The other ones, we'll have a better idea when two things occur. We get the financial report and we go through the next TIP process, which is we're just starting now.
And I have one last set of questions. This came up at our last meeting. So there are a number of proposed projects that connect to the interstate system in the list of priority projects. And it seems to me that that may be problematic if you rebuild the interstate system, but you don't build those connecting roadway improvements and you create congestion areas potentially, or vice versa. If you build a 6-lane roadway up to the interstate system, but you don't have appropriate interchanges that can accommodate them, we have another point of congestion. So could you just talk a minute about the need for coordination between those projects as you move forward?
Well, I can give you an example. I think the one that comes to my head would be Houghton Road. We have just finished the Houghton Road traffic interchange. And the city and the county have worked both north and south of that to coordinate all of it so that we end up with a whole viable corridor all the way through there. That was a significant amount of cooperation. We've got another project right now that is out to bid and will be starting construction after the first of the year. And that's a section of I-10 between the Ruthroff and Ina that's going to be widened. And within that section, we're going to be with cooperation with the county and the additional of county funding, we're going to be connecting Sunset to River Road. So bringing that over the interstate, over the railroad, over the river, and onto River Road. And all of that is due to significant cooperation between the region and ADOT and all the entities in PAG. We have a very good relationship down here. It works very well.
Just, I don't want to get us down the weeds too much. Just final question. So you indicated that the country club improvements are the first set of improvements that were made of these projects. They allow some of the other things to happen sequentially. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so it would be important for us to look at those regional connection roadways as part of that country club project to make it work for all the other improvements you intend to make. Is that correct? So that might suggest a priority for RTA funding to accomplish those connective points.
Exactly the case, because we'll end up with projects where we can get an economy of scale. So if, for example, you're doing the country club project and ADOT has its footprint, which you can look online and see exactly what it is. If the city or the county want to come in and expand it, we can administer the entire project through us with the cooperation and the funding through the RTA or whatever source, and they can gain that economy of scale for the entire project. So it works very well.
Thank you, Mr.
That's the
Chairman.
point I was trying to make at the beginning, a little clumsily. Ramon, did you have a?
I was just
comment?
gonna get real quick a comment. It's not a question, it's just a comment. I could echo what Bruce said earlier, but one of the things I want to say is when it comes to transportation funding, there's no guarantee no matter what. And I've advocated for transportation funding my entire career and was paid to do so at some point in my life. I could tell you firsthand that that is a comment I don't take lightly, because I understand the point of the funding situation we have in our community and our state level and our federal level. So nothing was guaranteed. And so I just wanted to make that very clear.
All right, we have last couple questions. We have Abby and then Moss again to close this off.
Thanks. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Abby.
Okay, great. I appreciate having people from the different jurisdictions here, but I'm still very confused about the order that we're doing this all in. Once again, it looks like we're getting roadway projects. I'm looking at the statute once again, 485309, and the only shall is public transportation. I volunteered to be on the public transportation subcommittee for the CAC. We haven't set a single meeting yet. We don't have an evaluation tool to look at all these projects yet. I know there was a subcommittee dealing with that as well. And I don't see how our guiding principles are being applied. So it looks like a patchwork yet again that's out of order, talking about funding pots and rolling over projects and how we fit into ADOT projects. And of course we do, but it still doesn't look like it's a coherent part of a regionally focused project that's supposed to emphasize public transportation. And we need better evaluation tools. And I just don't know how we're supposed to be doing this.
Okay, thank you. Moss.
Thank you. I think, to that note, I guess on the transit topic, having been born and raised in Tucson, I remember continually throughout these decades, people talking about getting a commuter rail between Phoenix and Tucson at a minimum. And so I think the one question I had, and I have another one after that, is why didn't ADOT submit a project, given understanding the statutory requirements for the RTA to be a transit focused funding mechanism, and understanding that interest from our community, our region. Why didn't ADOT submit a transit project that would connect the two communities by rail?
So I guess my first point to that is, we submitted projects that we thought could be constructed reasonably within the time frame of the program. Without having any pre-planning or any advanced planning or any kind of rail work, I don't see that it can necessarily be constructed in that time frame. These projects all have a design concept report completed and are ready to be moved forward to construction.
I guess why weren't, this isn't a new need like that we've identified, right? Like I said, it's been several decades where the community members have been bringing this up. So, ADOT has had several decades to design, to plan that out. And I'm just trying to understand why that wasn't done and why we should fund these projects and not tell ADOT to go back to the drawing board and submit something that would tick that box.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, a very good one. And my first thought is that might be the desire of the region, but that would be an entire statewide relevant point to go. You'd have to go through outside the PAG region all the way up into Phoenix. So.
Well, the I-10 goes into Phoenix. It also goes into New Mexico. It also goes into California. So this is where I'm getting into. This is the safety enhancements that are being described for this corridor. Well, yes, it will benefit our region. I completely understand that. I don't understand though why it's our responsibility when really this is interstate commerce. This is connecting the entire state. This is connecting MAG to PAG and also down into Cochise, right? So why is this a regional project and not, how is it that we can say that this is a regional project but not a neighborhood project? But a neighborhood street improving that isn't a regional project because, I can make the case that my neighborhood street connects me up to First, which is a regional corridor, which also gets me to, Oracle, and I can get down to Ajo, going down First. So why aren't those necessarily? Why wouldn't that neighborhood street just be as an integral part to our regional transportation system as a state or federal infrastructure project?
Well, you're really comparing two different things. First of all, the I-10 interstate is an existing facility. So
is my neighborhood street.
The projects that we're putting on here are an update and a modernization of an existing facility to make it safer and expand it to handle future capacity. A rail is not existing yet. It's not there. So whereas this is enhancing an existing facility to interact better with the local region.
So what you're saying to me with that is to interact with the local region. That's just transportation planning, right? That's just what planners do, is look at context and design something that fits the contents and meets the needs of that area. So to say that we need to fund this to ensure that it meets our regional needs, I think is a red herring, or it's misleading to say that this wouldn't happen anyways, because that's exactly what the task is. And if it's not, then I'd be really questioning what's going on at ADOT if that's not actually part of the plan. And this gets me to my other question too about, you mentioned IIJ, JA, and you mentioned, part of that all wrapped into that is Justice 40. And Justice 40 has a whole section on transportation priorities from the federal government that will inform then how federal dollars and grants are being distributed to our states and regions. And one of the big efforts of this administration is to reconnect neighborhoods that have been separated by bad transportation planning and interstates, such as I-10. And, we have books written locally, Shadows of the Freeway by Lydia Otero, that are expressing how harmful and bad that this, these types of plans could be. So, saying that, these funds helped us by putting a sidewalk underneath the underpass, and that's why you need to fund for these enhancements, just seems to be misaligned with what federal priorities are for granting funds to areas. And so I'm just trying to understand too, how is ADOT addressing and meeting those, and, doesn't that kind of relieve the regional pressure that is trying to be applied here for us to throw cash at these projects?
Well, I'm familiar with the book that you mentioned. I read it. One of the there are systemic issues. I mean, there's no avoiding it from, 50, 60, 70 years ago when the interstate was constructed. Again, the expansion of these projects are to help connect ADOT's facility to the local region. To include all the points that you pointed out could be all parts of this project in some form or another. We need to have the community in the region at the table to participate in that conversation and help with funding of certain aspects of it if they are beyond what ADOT typically would construct.
Yes, we
Thanks.
agree. We agree
Thanks for all the
that
comments.
community is going to be involved. I guess, but back to Arlen's point, we don't have then the budget of what you're trying to suggest we should fund, through those enhancements if that planning hasn't happened. So I don't know. I just have a lot of questions about what we're trying to do here and why our scarce regional dollars are being put towards these state projects. Thank you.
And that'll be, I'm sure, take up quite a bit of our debate time as it has already. Abby, can you make a quick comment so that I can get us moving on? We have 3 other jurisdictions that are planning to provide us some background on their priorities so that we can get at least half of the jurisdiction's information on board. Go ahead, Abby.
I can keep it snappy. Moss is far better educated on this than I am. I just feel like we're using a total lack of imagination as well as a lack of state guidance based on statute and a lack of guidance based on who we are. Everywhere where there's existing freight lines, there's a rail easement. So we can build rail. We are the community involvement right here, and we're telling you what the community involvement interests are and needs are, and we're being told that our needs are not feasible. I live in Midtown Tucson. I buy cars all the time. I bike everywhere. I take the bus everywhere. Underpasses are dangerous. I'm a small woman. I don't like walking alone under those. Paving a sidewalk and an underpass doesn't make it usable infrastructure. And we're not putting this in because we don't think it can be done in terms of rail. I don't understand. This is the place where we're supposed to be thinking big, being guided by statute, being guided by community. It feels like we're not doing any of that. And it feels, again, like we're wasting everybody's time, including, I appreciate, again, the jurisdictional folks. I didn't create this problem and you didn't create this framework. We're using your expertise to bring these specific projects, but this is not what we're here for. We're here for a regional plan. So I'm gonna probably continue to be really frustrated about this until we see some input from us, using our guiding principles, using our evaluation tools, piecing this all together and telling us that we can work towards things that we want, not what somebody decided was feasible a long time ago. That's it, Tom, I'll shut up.
Promises. Thanks for all the comments. And Rod, thanks very much for being here and for helping guide us through these ADOT priorities.
Thank you.
What's the, Crystal, what's next on the list of?
I believe it's Town of Marana and Terry's online.
Yeah, is Terry able to communicate with us? Okay, good.
Okay, can you hear us? This is Eric Montague, the deputy town manager. Unfortunately, Terry got pulled away on a personal matter. So I'll be talking through the Town of Marana project.
Okay, thanks. And let us get, yeah, there it is, the Northwest sub area. All right, Eric,
Perfect.
want to walk us through these slides very quickly and let us know what other info you've got so we can start to understand how the priorities came from the TMC for the projects that were initially submitted by Marana.
I promise not to ask any funding questions, get us on this.
Questions are good.
So we, well, with myself here this morning is Fausto Borrell, the Public Works Director and also Town Engineer. So he may chime in from time to time as well. So the overall outline that we were originally envisioning going over was the project outline identified within the materials. The slide orientation is a little bit different. We'll try to stick with them that are kind of in presentation order as based on the slides. Ina Road corridor itself from I-10 Camino de la Tierra is obviously to widen the 6-lane roadway. It's a significant enhanced safety as well as connectivity, both from the east and to the west to not only our partners within unincorporated portions of Pima County, but also further east as you go into Oro Valley as well. From the west, it'll provide for increased connectivity in a really large commercial corridor is kind of the significant element there.
So just to add to that too, in discussions during the previous session we had, we were talking with Pima County combining this as they have a project to the east as well. So it truly is beyond our scope and beyond our region and beyond our boundary. Sorry.
And then identified here is our Cortero, or basically Thornydale Road, for further considerations, projects in that sub area. Obviously, we're also in support of that project, from Cortero Road to Camino del Norte, as well as actually even continuing the expansion all the way to Tangerine Road, was of significant interest and discussion at the most recent TMC meeting. Is there another slide or?
I believe there's one for the west side as well.
One for the west side as well.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Eric, I noticed that, and maybe you could speak to this as you go through these, the ranking of the projects. If we go back to the previous slide, 1535, the Honor Road project was
Number 1.
number 4, I think, on your list.
Correct. It's number 4 on the overall list as included in the material, the packet today.
Right.
And it does remain, we believe that's representative of the importance and nature of the project, obviously to our community and to the region.
Good. All right, go for the west side now.
So now moving to the west side, there are more projects obviously identified there, and in prioritization order, back to the original element has to do with Cortero Road, I-10 reconstruction. That's an existing interchange at grade that obviously is identified as needs to be grade separated for a number of reasons, up to and including increased safety elements. Obviously, removing that at grade crossing provides for greater connectivity for emergency services, personnel, and just general flow. And as well as it provides for increased capacity and connectivity, again, to our partners to the east, as you go into unincorporated portions of Pima County, and then further east as you transition eventually into Oro Valley. It will provide in some enhanced benefit for connectivity to the west, as some portions of the unincorporated Pima County folks, as you transition from Cortero back to Ina, Wade, and then back Pitcher Rocks, we do see traffic flows from there as well. It is a significant area of activity, and we view this as being our number one priority. The next priority is the Tangerine. It's our second priority is Tangerine Road, I-10. And that's a reconstruction again, removing an at-grade crossing and having a grade separated interchange. A lot of similarity in my previous comments, not to regurgitate that, but basically, obviously from a safety perspective, that's a better overall from a traffic flow and safety personnel or responses being able to get to each side of the highway is provided, as well as providing increased connectivity to our partners to the east. Again, same partners, Pima County, some portion of unincorporated Pima County, Oro Valley, as well as to the west. The next project is the Marana Road and I-10 TI. Similar there. You can see there's kind of a theme here with our interchanges. Very, basically the same information. Increased safety. There's a number of points of conflict there related to various, basically intersections as well that would be eventually removed as part of this, as well as removing an at-grade crossing again, improved overall connectivity. And that's our third in our list for priority projects. Moving to the next interchange is the Moore Road and I-10 traffic interchange. This would be a new interchange, so one is not there currently. One has been identified when there are longer range plans and planning within our overall development plans, so has been identified. And the grade separated interchange there would also provide for an additional access point to be able to get in and out of the developments that are planned, that exist and that are planned in that area. And that's the fifth priority in our overall list. And is there an additional slide? For the other projects. So those are identified in the priority. There are other projects that are included, 6 through 11. A couple of them, as identified in the materials, have been pulled for consideration based upon the discussion that surrounded those projects. We'd be glad to discuss or elaborate if there are any questions related to any of those individual projects. But the way that they're presented they are in relative order of importance to our community. And with that, I'll turn it over for any available questions, if there are any.
We have some comments and questions online as well as in the room. I first saw Bruce's hand, then Arlen, and I see Sean's hand online as well.
So what seems to be common to many of these is the conflict with the railroad. And I'm just wondering if there are set aside or special funds under the infrastructure federal funding for roadway conflicts and resolving roadway conflicts. And has that been looked into at this point? Have there been any discussions with our federal delegation about that?
And this is a question to the town. So we're not aware of any specific pot of funds that have been identified for removing those from a safety perspective, removing those at-grade crossings. Unless ADOT is aware of some program that I might not be privy to.
Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to answer that. As you all know, historically, the Union Pacific, they've had the right of way, and it's been a challenge. They have been much more willing to help to accommodate safety improvements and grade separated crossings. But when it comes to funding, there are no other funding at this point for those kind of safety improvements. That's one of the reasons that we continue to work with ADOT and our local government partners, as well as federal funds and regional funds, to do as much as we can with some of these safety crossings. But the railroad itself doesn't contribute much at all, if anything.
Yeah, I know this is this goes without saying, but clearly the $350 to $400 million for these 4 TIs would be probably more than is available. But there also appears not to be any I-10 or sorry, any ADOT participation plan for those as well. Is that right, Eric?
That is correct. But all of these projects that have been identified by the town of Marana fall outside of the scope of the time horizon that we've been provided by ADOT.
Arlen?
Yeah, just a brief question. I may have missed it. You may have said it. On the Thornydale Road, 2546, where was that in your list of priorities?
That particular project, this project was talked about at the TMC, and we viewed the discussion surrounded the opportunity for us to participate in that overall project to extend the northerly portion.
Mhm.
From where Pima, its terminus, its original planned terminus at Pima County, and connect and continue it northward to Tangerine. So it wasn't an original submitted project, but it was a project identified as an opportunity to partner and to tag along to continue that road from where it ended on Pima County.
Okay, thanks. It was a good choice.
It's a needed project, and it was a great discussion.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Sean?
Yeah, I just have, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a question regarding, the proposals for the rural crossings. Does any other funding you require impact fee from any of the development? I know in that area, there's a lot of development going on, but it might not be enough to where it can cover that cost. And it's interesting, that ADOT, does a little bit, but not a lot. It's more up to the actual city itself to put its funds. And I understand that Marana is trying to be more on the forethought, thinking of getting this done before the development really takes impact. Because I understand, like, for instance, Cotero Road, yeah, it's a very bad intersection, just at that light where you have stopped and the train comes and you're basically stuck. And that's a safety issue and just a long issue that needs to be resolved. But what other funding sources? I know the impact fee that comes in, can that be used towards that, or is that a separate total cost?
Thank you. That's a great question. So based upon these projects as incorporated within RTA Next are likely to, should they be further considered and make it, will fall outside of the development requirement or the basically improvement requirement. For at least a couple of for Tangerine Road, for example, and for Marana Road TI interchanges. So there's certain improvements that have to happen well in advance of the next 20-year time horizon. So we do have within our impact fee program what we're calling interim improvements. That'll basically do some modest improvements, somewhat similar to the actual Cotero Road improvements, where we gained additional abutment lanes, modified striping, and be able to get some additional capacity until the actual reconstruction, whenever that may occur. So the actual impact fee program that we're in the process of adopting does not have a full reconstruction projects identified. But it's something that could be evaluated or considered in the future, but it's not within our overall next year 10-year window for our impact fee program.
Thank you.
Thanks. Moss?
Thank you. So I have 2 questions. So, as the town of Marana may be familiar, our unanimously approved revised guiding principles note demand management as a key principle that we want in RTA Next. So I'll pick on the Ajo 6-lane road widening project. I'm curious what demand management strategies that the town of Marana has deployed along that corridor to help to alleviate congestion, and if nothing has been deployed to date, what are the plans for such strategies to ensure that this doesn't, in 20 years turn into an 8-lane road widening? You know what I mean?
I understand. And with me is Fausto Borrell, who will walk us through that.
So yes, thank you. Good question. You had mentioned Ajo. I think you meant Ina Road.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
So currently we're in the third year of a 5-year program with the University of Arizona.
Fausto, we're having trouble hearing you. Maybe a little closer to your microphone would help.
Yeah, sorry, I'll speak up a bit too. We are currently in a third year of a 5-year program. We've been partnering with the University of Arizona, working on those type of activities like ITS type corridor optimization. And we've really been concentrating on our high demand areas. So this corridor, in fact, Ina Road being one of them, Thornydale, Cortero. We have technology at most of those intersections, or I believe actually at all of those. We utilize signals programs, vision. The other one is just updating and improving our max view system. So we have a lot of those elements currently underway that we're in the middle of working on. And we're actually looking at enhancing those intersections for future technologies as those come about as well. So to answer your question, yes, we are working on those type of activities as we go forward to try to minimize the need to add more real estate, but actually improve throughput.
That's helpful. Thank you. I guess kind of, demand management looks a lot of different ways. It can be technology investment, as you described, but it can also be looking at the broader network of the Marana street corridors. And so are there any strategies and investments in mode switching or investments to make it Marana a more friendly place to get around for non-personal vehicles that could also contribute to this? To help alleviate the congestion issues on Ina?
Yes, so some of those activities kind of mentioned previously, we are looking at the other corridors, so the adjacent corridors, again, mentioning the Cortero and the Thornydale. So again, that is car-centric, if you will, but we do have multimodal facilities as part of all those roadway networks. And that is something that is, we're not actively tracking that at this point, but as part of the mile vision system, it does actually take those counts and gives you those type of information and feedback as we go further towards those elements. Currently, we're not seeing a heavy, like other modes of traffic along those corridors, but that is something that we can assess and analyze.
Okay. Well, last question on this thread, and then I have one more for the CAC as a whole. I'm curious to understand how and if Marana is considering the longer term impacts of these other investments in the need for a 6-lane road, and also just like looking at population growth changes and all these different things, because, Tucson, we have multiple examples of where in RTA 1 things were overscoped and we didn't need the 6-lane option. We needed just some other types of improvements, and given what the reality was and what other interventions were placed. So I'm curious, how is Marana factoring in future changes and what would be like the plan if it turns out 6 lanes isn't ultimately needed because of these other interventions that you've put into place?
Well, I guess, again, thank you for the question. Good question. We're talking about Ina again, specifically.
Sorry, do I keep saying I'm sorry.
No, I'm just making the 6 lanes. I didn't know if you were talking about some of our other projects. Currently, Ina is well over capacity during the peak hour under current conditions. So future growth, we're seeing more growth on the west side of that area as well. So To answer your question, yes, it already triggers the need. At certain times, we are already well above capacity of the roadway.
At certain times though, so it's not like a consistent congestion issue. It's just for, maybe an hour to a day.
It's typically with your peak hour, which is, obviously a lot of us design and try to work for those areas of the day. But still, there is substantial traffic loads on that roadway during majority of the day.
At what's the level of service on those during the majority of the rest of the day?
Well, it's acceptable. So it's, I don't want to misspeak or tell you numbers I don't have right in front of me, but just, I'm guessing at least a level of service C. We do see a high peak during the midday, your lunchtime traffic, those type of things. But throughout the day, we see a continuous flow of traffic along that corridor.
Okay, but it is acceptable. Okay, and then my question for, the CAC to consider is, seeing again I-10 projects on the board here. I think that we need to have a conversation about how much, if any, regional funds should get spent on state and federal infrastructure. I think it's a thing that we can see that trickles down, but how much are we going to, what is within our purview as a region to put, scarce regional tax dollars for federal and state investments and managed infrastructure.
Very good and noted. It's absolutely something that we'll have to talk about in order to pare down the request list that we have. That, among other types of projects, will have to be something that we talk about for sure. See, Brian, you have a comment, and then we'll move on to the town of Sahuarita.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think the interesting thing with these projects is the fact that they all need to be grade separated interchanges. And I'd like to tag on to what Moss says. I do think it's important to look at all modes of transportation while these are being considered. However, other than Cortero, Tangerine, and Marana, I don't know of any other interchanges throughout southern Arizona at this point that are still at grade. I do believe there's a separation through them all. So when you think about where Ina Road is now, where it's now grade separated, the roadway goes up over the interstate and the railroad tracks, it alleviates not only the congestion on vehicle traffic. I've seen estimates of roughly 80 trains a day going through the region, which means that's 80 times a day that at the grade things are stopped. But there's also now at Ina, there are sidewalks and there are bicycle lanes that allow you to cross the railroad tracks, where at Tangerine, Cortero, and Marana, you do not have a sidewalk, you do not have a bicycle path to go over the railroad tracks. And actually we see it during El Tour de Tucson almost every single year, where there are bicycle accidents that occur at those grade crossings. So there is a pedestrian, bicycle, as well as motor vehicle safety element that goes along with these interchanges, as well as dramatically reducing congestion when you have 80 trains a day going through. So that's 80 times a day those intersections are shut down. Vehicles are forced to idle and traffic backs up waiting for the trains to pass through. So I find the unique thing for the region with these interchanges is that at least along the interstate, once you get past now Ina Road, there is no other at grade crossing that I can think of. And if I'm wrong, please someone point me out throughout the region. So that to me is unique for all modes of traffic at this intersection or at these intersections.
Thanks, Brian. Quick follow-up from Dale.
Okay. Yeah, I had one quick question, follow up on the coordination of Ina Road. This is really kind of a two-agency corridor. It's a county corridor and a Barata corridor. And the question is where you're at Impact, are you where you come together, are you coordinating your signal timing systems between the county portion of the road and the city portion of the road, or the Beretta portion of the road? And is that part of your plans of the widening?
So, yeah, thank you for that question. Good question. Currently, we are not. However, I know that the county utilizes a similar MyoVision type system technology there. So those type of. So yes, we can definitely. We recently, actually, at the last meeting, discussed about incorporating the two projects. So I guess that's another thing to point out from the previous questions received, that this 6-lane segment will actually extend to the east. And so, that's kind of part of a bigger picture improvement. But yes, as part of that signalization type aspects, definitely our traffic team can work with our regional partners and work on those type of coordination activities.
I feel that's a very important coordination. So thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Appreciate Eric and Fausto giving us that information and for being with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We'll be following up, I'm sure, with other questions as we get more into the discussion of individual projects, but thank you again. I believe Beth Abramowitz is online and can talk to us about the Sahuarita area, as well as the other areas, the other portions of that sub area.
I am. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to chat with everybody. Our list is relatively small, and the majority of it, 3 out of our 4 projects that are specifically Sahuarita are new roadways. If you look back just 20 years ago, the town of Sahuarita had a population of about 3,500 people. And by the new census, it's now closer to 35,000. That increase in population has come, it's primarily, we're a bedroom community, that we don't have right now the kind of regional employers, the manufacturing centers, things along those lines. And building some of these new roads will actually extend some of the existing roads into some of the areas that are zoned appropriately to hopefully maybe bring some of that into the town of Sahuarita, so that we can take advantage of things like Sahuarita Road and Rancho Cerdo Boulevard, where we have bike lanes, things along those lines. All the projects that we are proposing are all multimodal. So as those opportunities present themselves, we can hopefully promote additional modes of transportation. Our projects are in order. We did remove 3 off of the list as part of our outreach to our citizens. We did do a citizen survey, and we suggested a number of projects and asked them to rank them. And we also did ask for specific recommendations for projects at that time. So the priority ranking that you were given is the priority ranking that our citizens came back to us with. And the number 1 project on there was the La Vita Road, Sahuarita Road to Nogales Highway extension. Right now, the road just dead ends just past the Los Aboles mobile home park. And there is additional residential and mixed use proposed in that southern area. It would provide us another northwest connection, or a north-south connection. Right now we have La Cañada and Nogales Highway kind of bookending the town. So we don't have anything really that goes north-south all the way through town. And along that La Vita corridor is our town center district. So that is zoned for some of those, I guess, more intensive commercial and or industrial uses. So hopefully maybe we could, by having that roadway, that infrastructure available, attract some of those commercial or manufacturing type uses that would give us maybe more of those employer opportunities. Same thing for the El Toro extension, that we do have a developer constructing a kind of interim roadway from where El Toro currently ends, which is kind of halfway between I-19 and La Vita Road. This project would be to kind of fully flesh out a 2-lane roadway through there. to put in sidewalks, multi-use lanes, things along those lines, because the initial project will just be a vehicular connection. Our number 3 project, it's a project that actually the town has been working on our own. Part of the first RTA projects were the first phase of the Quail Crossing extension, and the town is currently using our own funding to build that connection, to connect it all the way through from Nogales Highway to Old Nogales Highway. Our number 3 project would be to take this project and expand it to a 4-lane road and take it out of the floodplain completely, kind of what you see on Sunset right now. The project that the town built is really, we call it like a 10-year bridge. So anything more than the 10-year storm would mean that we would have to close this road. So this project, it would not be prioritized in even like phase 1 or 2 of the RTA Next. We'd probably be looking in like near the end of RTA Next if this project were to move forward, because that's when we anticipate the demand based on what we're seeing coming into us from Quail Creek, Maderas, and some of these other developments. And then the last priority project that we have is the Pima Mine Road expansion. Right now, anybody who lives in the kind of northern section of Rancho Sarita, everybody dumps onto Rancho Sarita Boulevard, and you have 2 options. You either go north to Pima Mine Road or you come south to Sarita Road. And if there's ever an issue at one of those locations, it causes a real problem. And right now we already see backups on Pima Mine Road. Additionally, Pima Mine Road does not have any kind of bike or pedestrian facilities on it. So this project would be to widen it to a 4-lane road and expand those multimodal uses. The only other project that we talked about in the meeting with the TMC members that was kind of still in this region was keeping the Sonoran corridor kind of in everybody's view, but narrowing down kind of the scope as to what RTA Next might fund for it, kind of to some of the questions and concerns that I've been hearing here today about this. And the funding that was left, the recommendation that was left for the CAC was for the town of Sarita and for the Pima County to update our MSNRs after the tier 2 is done to show.
Explain MSNR for the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Folks on our.
Yes, sorry, Tom. Our major streets and routes plan, it's a planning document, it's a zoning document, so that anybody in the future who would want to build through these areas would have to set aside that known right of way. One of the things that we see with some of these projects is that adds to the expense over time, especially when you're talking about a 20-year window of opportunity, is that things get built and now they're in the path of these roads, whether it's a road widening or, with just a parking lot, or if it's a new retail facility or, residential homes. Nobody wants to see, the additional expense and just the impact to our region by, relocating these businesses and people. So if Pima County and the town of Sarita, after that tier 2 is done, if we update our MSNR, we can prevent things from being built along that corridor. So at some point in the future, if and when the Sonoran corridor is built, we haven't significantly added to the cost and the impact to people in those areas, that we will actually be planning for that future build. It would also give us the opportunity with having some funds available, should something become available where we could actually purchase the right of way. We be, either town of Sarita, Pima County, the region in general, to prevent that from being developed. So that's why it was kind of left in with as a priority, but with only a $20 million price tag. Like I said, to facilitate those two items. We do still have one other project, but it wasn't left in as a priority. Like I said, we did take out 3 projects because they were the ones that I guess our citizens were less enthusiastic about. So, and we have potentially other ways that those could be funded if they became necessary. So in order to maybe kind of help lighten the load financially, we agreed to initially remove those from consideration. And that's what I have.
A quick question, Beth. How
Sure.
many crossings of the Santa Cruz do you operate right now? I see you have Quail Crossing would be a new Santa Cruz River Bridge. How many do you have right now for the entire town?
I believe there's 3, Tom.
Okay.
So this would be our 4th, and that's one of the reasons that it was really important. There's actually it is Green Valley Fire Station 155 is right on the east side of Old Nogales Highway, basically at the Quail Crossing Boulevard where it comes out of Quail Creek. So that really improves their time to respond to emergencies, especially to our commercial district, which basically this connects our commercial district with Quail Creek.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple questions. Moss?
Thank you. Thanks, Beth, for this overview. A quick question about the survey. I have a few questions, of course. But first off, in that survey that you referenced, were community members presented with transit projects, or were they solely a kind of slate of roadway improvement?
No, we kind of had we based it a lot on what we saw initially, what we saw a desire for the first time around. But they were also given kind of that open-ended opportunity to ask for specific projects. Most of the requests that we hear for additional transit, unfortunately, come from the Green Valley area. We do have a relatively well-used park and ride here at Town Hall. So I said, we don't typically get a lot of additional requests. That's something that's not really kind of, I guess, high on anybody's radar here for that additional need in this area. There have been a couple community meetings along those lines. And again, it seems to be mostly Green Valley folk as opposed to Town of Sarita folks that are really interested in additional transit routes.
So just to clarify, though, none of the survey did not present transit projects to Sarita members or community members, correct?
I don't think that there was an actual project proposed, no, because we'd never heard of a specific project that we wanted, but they were given, I guess, categories like bike projects, and that's a whole different section that would be what we would have included maybe in our categoricals, which we're not talking about today, but we wanted to get a feel for what people felt was missing here. And it included, bike lanes, pedestrian paths, equestrian trails, to your point, transit or improved transit stops. And those did not rank particularly high amongst members of our community.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just know I hear loud and clear the priority of the community of being trying to build economic growth and support economic development. And so it's just really interesting that, roadways, especially, it seems, Sarita's at just such a special moment in the planning stage of having the opportunity to, not make the same mistakes that pretty much every other city in the US has made as far as heavily investing in roadways that are now like looking for ways to remedy and deconstruct all of that. And so it's just really interesting to see that known best practices, nationally are not being kind of implemented at this scale and at this moment. That seems really pivotal, especially knowing how good transit can be for wealth generation locally and for spurring economic development. Tucson has plenty of examples of that. And it is also interesting to hear that so many folks are not interested in transit down there, because I actually ran into some folks that worked at the U of A, longtime Sarita residents, and they were having a beer at the annex, and we had a whole chat about transit in our region, and they were likewise begging for some kind of rail connection between Sahuarita and Tucson. It would make their commuting life so much easier. It'd make going out to businesses, like places like the Annex, so much easier and safer for them, so that they could safely have a beverage and get home without concern for putting anybody at safety risk. And also it's dark, and it was a rainy night in the monsoon season. They were concerned about the drainage facilities and all these different things. And so it just, it sounds, focusing on, again, like local wealth generation and economic development, having people spend, being transportation burdened, investing in car maintenance and insurance and car payments and all these other things. It just seems like a real missed opportunity. And I'll tie us back to our guiding principles and the sole statutory requirement of the RTA is transit investments. And so, yeah, I'm just, as far as feedback on this list, I generally, it sounds like this is a thoughtful list to help make some key improvements within the community. I really think that there is a missed opportunity here for transit, though, and would love to see some ideas come forward from Sahuarita that would help tick those boxes and our obligation to fund transit projects.
So Mas, thank you for that, and I appreciate your perspective. The one thing that we do hear about in our community with regard to transit is about the need for more paratransit programs, which to that end, it's more of a program as opposed to a project. So again, I think that would be something that we would look to address as part of the categoricals once we get to that discussion. But also one of the things that might help with that discussion about maybe why we don't see more transit is that kind of what we hear from people is that they really want more opportunities to live and work in their community. That transit to that is kind of the implication that I have to leave my community to go somewhere else. And they're looking to stay here. They're looking for maybe more of those other opportunities, to your point of, reducing that footprint of, I don't want to have to drive 31 miles, regardless of whether it's on a bus or in my own car, to my job. I would much rather have that opportunity 10 miles away, because then that does give me more opportunities to spend time with my family and take advantage of those pedestrian trails and bike paths and everything else that we're trying to build into, as part of this community, that they don't want to be spending time. They don't want that lost time on a commute. They want those facilities, which we don't have in town right now. And to your point about like looking at this and kind of planning accordingly, is that we're trying to build that infrastructure so that development occurs where it needs to occur, as opposed to always being reactive to somebody bought a piece of property and now we have to figure out how to service it or service it correctly. We want to be instrumental in shaping where that development occurs and making sure it happens at the most opportune locations where it's going to cause the least problems and give everyone the most access. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. And I mean, then this is where I go back to the best practices point. It's like the whole point of laying down tracks is that you're deliberately steering development to there, because there's a guarantee that transit line is not going to move. Whereas, if you're reliant just putting down roads, how many roads do we have throughout our region that were going to be the economic hub and then are essentially abandoned because for whatever reason? And so that is like the whole point of laying down transit and why it's such a good economic development tool, because there's that guaranteed assuredness to developers that we're invested here. This is permanent. You're going to have traffic coming through here and you need to do it. And like 10 miles, right? That was my mom's commute from the east side of Tucson to the U of A. And, it's a small distance in some scale, but it's also still going to take you quite a bit of time. It was a 30 to 40 minute commute for her every day, and pretty expensive gas wise. And so, I think that I'm pushing back on the idea that transit is only for large scale regional connections. It is also for, making small, inner area connections too, and serving that benefit. And this is where professionals such as yourself, who are constantly getting immersed with these types of best practices that have been known for a couple decades now too, that, this is where it's, that job to bring that forth and also provide that good insight about what is the right thing to be doing to have these outcomes. Most people don't understand some of these concepts. So.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we still need to get to the city of Tucson, and I think we've gotten the gist of your comments. Certainly, we have a lot more conversation to embark on with regard to transit within our entire program. I want to thank Beth for staying in there for this meeting and being present to answer our questions and give us the insights. Thanks, Beth.
You're very welcome, Tom. Thanks for the opportunity.
Last but not least today, Sam Credio, the Director of Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility, is here to talk to us about, I think, a couple of the sub areas, perhaps. Before I turn it over to you, Sam, I just want to congratulate you on being named one of the 40 under 40 this year by the Tucson Hispanic Chamber. Congratulations, well earned. It's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the congratulations. I really appreciate it. Rather than go sub area by sub area, let me just give you a brief overview of all of the, not all the projects, but an overview of all of our some of the stats of our projects. I want to touch on a few that are a priority, and then we can certainly go through the sub areas individually if there are very specific questions. So the city of Tucson had 28 named projects that were submitted to RTA Next. 23 of those 28 emerged as TMC priorities from the TMC workshop. 4 of those were considered non-priorities and 1 was removed from consideration. The city of Tucson has projects represented in 4 of the 6 subregions. So we're kind of spread out all over. It was a pretty interesting exercise the day of the workshop to just kind of divide and conquer in the various groups that we had, but we had some great staff there. And I do want to thank the RTA staff for the work they did at the workshop. It was very well run and we felt it was well worth our time. The prioritization for the city of Tucson is based primarily on our Move Tucson master plan, mobility master plan. And what the Move Tucson project did is take into account things like safety, equity, multimodal connectivity throughout the region, as well as optimizing our transportation network. We did a fairly robust public outreach process. The Move Tucson results are available online if you'd like to take a look at those. And so that's primarily what we based our the priority of our projects on. At the top end of our priority is really a quadruplet of Drexel projects in which we are really going from city limit to city limit on Drexel. One of the great results of the exercise at the workshop was that we identified with Pima County that they also have some projects bookending Drexel. And so we discussed about including those as part of that overall Drexel corridor, both on the west terminus as well as the east terminus. And so those are going to be our highest priority projects in the RTA Next plan. We do have a pair of high capacity transit projects that were considered and did emerge as priorities by the TMC. That is a 6th Avenue Ronstadt Transit Center to Tucson International Airport high capacity transit corridor, as well as Oracle Road from Tohono Chadai Transit Center down to the Ronstadt Transit Center. Those 2 were in our top 10. One project that was just outside the top 10 at number 11 was Irvington Road from Kolb to Houghton. And that's actually one of our few widening projects that we have submitted for RTA Next. The majority of our projects are what we call modernization projects, which is really looking at bringing in sidewalk upgrades, whether adding sidewalks or just closing gaps, optimization to the traffic signal network, adding streetlights, again, just modernizing the corridor to our most current design standards. Irvington Road from Kolb to Houghton is one of our few widening projects. Currently that's a 2-lane roadway. It has no sidewalks, no streetlights. It does have a couple of traffic signals at a few key locations. It does connect Kolb Road and Houghton Road as major north-south corridors. Also runs directly adjacent to Pima Community College East, and it's very close to the Santa Rita /JTED campus. There was some discussion at the workshop about moving that into the categoricals and kind of taking a look at the scope of that project. The city feels really strongly that there should be a 4-lane cross section and bringing all of the amenities that come along with that, including sidewalks, bicycle paths, street lighting. We are open to the idea of taking a look at it as a categorical project. However, we do feel strongly that that should be maintained as a road widening project, especially given the proposed ADT of upwards of 17,000 vehicles in the future.
So Sam, if that were to become a categorical, what category would it be in, or would it just simply be overlay the existing 2-lane?
Yeah, so that was the conversation at the workshop, is taking a look at the scope of work on that project and considering it for a future categorical. We didn't get into specifics. There was another project that was also moved to categorical by our partners at Pima County, which was Palo Verde, that runs north-south, actually has a tail end of city limits on that project. That was another one that was considered for a future categorical project, but it was really along the same lines of that Irvington Road project. So those were two that we just, in our group, could not come to a consensus on a priority as a TMC. Pima County felt strongly about theirs project, and we also supported that, and the same with Irvington Road. So I just wanted to flag that as something that the city is interested in continuing to pursue. Let me just finish here. I'll get through my few closing remarks here. There was also one project that was considered removing from consideration. That is Harrison Road south of Irvington down to Valencia. That road currently doesn't exist. One of the bits of information I learned is that when we submitted that project as a potential RTA Next project, it did the cost estimate we submitted included taking advantage of some proposed developer fees in the future. And so just I wanted to point that out to provide a little bit of context, but that one was removed from consideration. The other thing I want to mention too, and then I'll be happy to answer questions, is that tomorrow, beginning at 1 p.m., our City of Tucson Mayor and Council will be meeting. We do have an item to discuss not only the current RTA projects, but also RTA Next projects. And I would encourage you to listen into that. It is available on YouTube. You can stream it live or go back and watch it later. And the material for that item is online. And we do provide some narrative on the outcome of the workshop, as well as some of our priorities on RTA Next. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have one quick question about the transit projects. Could you describe for the committee what you mean by the high speed or I'm
High
sorry,
capacity. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you,
I
Mr.
mean,
Chair.
there's 5 or 6 different names for, I think, what you're trying to describe, but it would be helpful for us to just hear what you call it and what the kind of scope of those kind of projects is.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. So we have 2 projects. Like I said, one is along the 6th Avenue alignment to the south, and another is on the Oracle Road alignment to the north. And those projects are submitted as high capacity transit projects. So that could be considered bus rapid transit, BRT, or streetcar. I don't know that we went to the level of specificity in our project proposals. Also, we were limited by the $600 million amount. So obviously, if we were to pursue something greater than bus rapid transit, we'd have to revisit those dollar amounts. But essentially, it's looking at 2 high capacity transit corridors with the technology still to be remained.
And BRT is sometimes using existing lanes, other times is creating new lanes. What if any specific ideas do you have about those projects in this case?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're right. True BRT typically does have dedicated right of way. It could operate within existing lanes. However, true BRT typically has its own dedicated right of way in order to have that high capacity, high speed transit that bus rapid transit offers. And so the idea is that you can move north and south in that corridor much quicker than you could on your regular fixed route. I would say in terms of the details of what that would look like in the future, we haven't fleshed those out yet, but typically, if you look at Federal Transit Administration's definition of bus rapid transit, it does include a dedicated right of way for the BRT route.
Yeah, our transit subcommittee will be meeting soon, and I think that'll be one of the things that I certainly will ask them to look at carefully is where do those kinds of projects belong, and how much detail is probably necessary for us to make the decision, as well as for the voters to understand and to make decisions. Good. Let's see, any questions here, Arlen?
Yeah, just really briefly. Thank you. It would help me. I printed out a list of all these projects, and if you could just get to us the number, the project number that each one is, so I don't, as I go through this, I want to make sure I didn't lose anything off of the submittals. I got the Drexel Road projects. I see 4 of them as number 1, but I was not real clear as to which ones the other ones are. And you don't have to do it now necessarily, but you could get it to us at some point that soon. That would be helpful.
Sure, be happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to the Irvington Road project. I was thinking about the 2-lane versus 4-lane, and I think traffic counts probably would be a major issue, but that's likely to be changed. There's major developments going on there. There are also, thing that would concern me a lot is there are also a lot of turning opportunities there. Have access not only to the Pima College, you have the access to the Ink Golf Course and the park, the East Side Park. You also have access to the bike park and all those facilities. And I would think at a minimum that you would want to be looking at a 3-lane. So.
Thank you for those comments, Dale. And absolutely, I think that was some of the conversation is there an opportunity to rescope that? Possibly there is, to the level of it becoming a categorical. I don't know. I think we still feel pretty strongly it should be a named project in the future plan.
And my other question relates to another similar road. As you know, I lived in that area. As a practical matter, when we talk about Harrison Road South, that project is also listed here. I put an RTA or 1. I pushed to get that road in. I didn't. All I got was the 2-lane bridge. But as a practical matter, I had 2 questions related to those costs. Or one related to cost, the other about the overall project is that an important project as far as you're concerned? And does the cost estimates include the money, is that a net of the half of the bridge that's supposed to already be there, that's supposed to be built as part of the RTA 1?
Yeah, great question. So just a point of clarification, there were 2 Harrison Road projects submitted for RTA Next. One was Golf Links to Irvington, which is the one Dale was just referencing. And then there was another, which is an actual new road south of Irvington down to Valencia. So on Dale's point, on the Harrison from Golf Links to Irvington, there is an RTA 1 project to build a 2-lane bridge across the Pantano Wash on the existing Harrison Road alignment. And there is a desire to widen that roadway to 4 lanes in the future. We are having some of those conversations about not only the RTA 1 project as a priority, but also the RTA Next project with mayor and council tomorrow. I do believe that we subtracted out the 2-lane bridge. I think the idea is that if the 2-lane bridge is built under the existing RTA plan, that we've come through with a 4-lane cross section and build an additional 2-lane bridge across the Pantano. I'll double check that and make sure I'm not giving you poor information, but that was my understanding about that project.
Bruce.
Yeah, just a quick question on the high capacity transit corridors. You indicated that probably would have dedicated lanes. Can you design those so that incrementally you could go from, say, buses to streetcar over the course of time? Does that contemplate that kind of evolution?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because we've had some of those same discussions. And so sure, essentially what you're designing with the BRT is a rubber tired streetcar, essentially, especially if you're going to do something that's electric, that operates and feels very much like a streetcar, but it is operating in the right of way on tires. I think a good example of this is Albuquerque has a bus rapid transit that's an electric vehicle. So yes, there is obviously considerable more construction issues you have to think about putting rail in the ground versus implementing a BRT. But the idea is that once you've established that right away, that in the future you could make a conversion to streetcar. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, Rod.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
No.
As long as the chair calls on you, you're free to express yourself in any way you'd like.
Thank you. The high capacity transit is going down Oracle. That's a state highway. But where would it go on to Oracle and how long would it stay?
Yeah, I think that's some of the work that we still need to do. Oracle is obviously one route that is, especially as identified in the project list. Stone is another that could be considered. They both run north-south. I think that if this project continues and makes its way through into the plan, and we're fortunate to have the voters support it, that we'd be having those conversations with ADOT about how we could partner. One interesting side note of the conversation that came out of the workshop is about having some level of high capacity transit north on Oracle up to Tangerine. And so obviously we know there's challenges in implementing that, but that was something that was that we discussed at the workshop, and we certainly want to continue those conversations.
Thank you. I think we'd enjoy being part of the conversation. I think it's a good option.
Good, thank you. Moss and then Karen, before we need to wrap up our meeting.
Thank you. Well, first, I just want to say I really appreciate that the majority of City of Tucson projects are following kind of current best practices for transportation planning and really looking at how to bring our facilities and thinking about transportation regionally into the modern era. I do, of course, need to pick on the road widening on Irvington. I'm very familiar with that segment. It's the route that I traveled going to the airport for the majority of my life, and definitely agree that it needs investment and improvement for safety, both bicycle and sidewalk. There's a lot of residential around there. There's a lot of desert. Dale, I think, mentioned the mountain bike park out there and everything. And so, I do just want to name all of those elements that it does need investment, but I really would encourage the City of Tucson to sharpen their pencils to see if it really needs to be widened to 4 lanes. And I also, because to me, the biggest, right, what's connecting over there from the east side, it's connecting residents to the base, it's connecting residents to Raytheon and to the airport. And I would just really implore the city to look at what are the opportunities to connect the east side overall better to those facilities and economic centers, so that they don't have to rely as much on cars, and making things safer and looking again, I think the BRT or the high capacity transit is such an wonderful investment for our region, because that means people in Oro Valley and Marana can easily hop on the high capacity transit and get to the airport with relative ease, or downtown. And something like that, I think, is a critical infrastructure need for the east side too. That's really been, I think, neglected with some of those connections, and we should do it right and make sure there's a high capacity transit system to get people to their places of work and to the airport. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen.
Hey, Sam. This is a question about the HCT down 6th Avenue. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. So as you know, there's been a lot of outreach to the community with meetings about what they colloquially call the Tucson Norte Sur, and that's been federally funded to, have meetings with community members. And there's a ton of passion surrounding this project, both good and bad. I'm curious what the city of Tucson's, sorry, I've got a garbage truck running by. I'm curious what the city of Tucson's coordination with Norte Sur and the consequences and the feedback from the community members is going to be, or has been.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Karen. So for the group here, the city of Tucson is currently conducting a study called Norte Sur that essentially looks at equitable transit-oriented development from the north, Tohono Tadai Transit Center, all the way along essentially the Oracle Stone alignment down through 6th Avenue to the airport. And it actually radiates out even a little further than that. I forget exactly the study corridor, but essentially that FTA funded project is looking at ways that the city of Tucson and its partnering jurisdictions can develop policy related to equitable transit-oriented development. That project is not defining any specific technology and is not making a specific route recommendation for that transit technology, whether that be BRT or streetcar, but rather looking at land use planning to try to get a leg up on future investments in high capacity transit in that area. So that's really important to know. I know that we are continuing to do some additional outreach related to that. We're going to be moving into phase 2 of that project, which is going to revolve around policy development for our mayor and council. And so that's currently where we're at on Norte Sur. And again, that area was identified as possible study area because one of the things that we found is more than half of all the jobs in the city of Tucson are within the study area along that corridor. And so we just identified it as what makes the most sense to evaluate and develop policies for land use planning related to high capacity transit.
Great. Thank you, Sam. And thank you for being here today. Thanks for sticking around to the end of our meeting. At least we fed you this time.
That's right. My pleasure. Thank you.
Good deal. Thanks. And as I've said to a couple of the others before, I'm sure we'll have more questions for you, both specific project and general program type questions, and particularly as we get into some of the categorical projects as well. So thanks. We have just one other item on our agenda today, which is our project tool evaluation working group update. I'm going to postpone that until our next meeting. And I would also ask you in item number 6 on our agenda, if you have any agenda items to forward those in the next couple of days to Paki so that we can get those incorporated. Thanks everyone for hanging around for this meeting. I think it's been really helpful to us all, and look forward to more of that conversation coming up at our next meeting. So I hereby declare us adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.